Very pretty.
So welcome everyone to the October meeting of the Australian Zonta Says Now think tank. Before we begin, I'd like to just cover some housekeeping. Please share your location in the chat line and use the chat line to ask questions and make comments. Leslie will be monitoring that for us. Please keep your microphone on mute, especially during presentations. And in the Q&A, please ask short, succinct questions and use welcoming and inclusive language. Thank you. As you can see, we've got quite a program today, so as usual. So we'd like to get moving. Firstly, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in all the places we meet from today around Australia and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We usually acknowledge a female First Nations leader at the start of each meeting. And today, I'd like to shine the spotlight on Larisha Jerome. She's a proud Jaraware, Waka Waka and Wully woman from Queensland. She's an economic justice advocate and host of the Rich Black Women podcast. Her aim is to redress the economic injustice that First Nations people face. Her unique approach is centred in her lived experience. She grew up in women's refuges and also on the streets, homeless as she was growing up, and she was, lived from paycheck to paycheck. So she looks at financial health through the lenses of mental health, spiritual health, and physical health, and uses storytelling and culture to break down taboos so women can overcome their shame and take control of their finances. So I'd like to congratulate Larisha for being a finalist in the 2024 Women's Agenda Leadership Awards. That's great. Anyway, we use this train, for those who haven't been to a think tank before, we use this train to remind ourselves why Zonta says now to gender equal climate action. The train was built during the Industrial Revolution, a time when humans started to put more carbon pollution into the atmosphere, where it's accumulating, forming a blanket around the planet and causing global heating and associated extreme weather events. The extreme heat, droughts, floods, fires and storms trigger social disruption, causing millions of people to lose their livelihoods and homes. And it's this social disruption that magnifies any existing inequality, including gender inequality. So Zonta Says Now stops the train by advocating for governments to meet their obligations under the Paris Agreement and closing the gender gaps in leadership, education, economic opportunity, health and safety. Because life for women and girls at the end of the train is hard. For example, because of the drought, 9-year-old Dabor in Sudan has to walk further each day to collect water and has no time to go to school. In Mozambique, Ayan's family lost everything in the floods and she's sold into child marriage. In Canada, wildfire smoke triggered young Claire's asthma, and her mother Judith is worried she will lose her casual job as she's had to take time off work to look after Claire. And Maria in Australia is 79 with a heart condition that's made worse in extreme heat. She's got no air conditioning and walks to the local library each day to sit in the cool. And she's worried how she'll physically survive the summer. Bushfires caused problems for Yvonne. Her home was destroyed. She had no insurance and has been living in temporary accommodation for over 2 years with no savings to get a permanent home. And a lifetime of lower pay makes it harder for women to bounce back after a disaster. And the number of women and girls living at the end of the train is increasing due to climate change. For example, studies have found that a 1 degree Celsius rise in average temperature is associated with a 6% rise in violence against women. And a 10% increase or decrease in average rainfall is associated with a 1% rise in child marriage. So this means if there's a 40% increase in rainfall, that's a 4% rise in child marriage. Social disruption is a huge issue when it comes to widening gender gaps. And in 2022, there were over 36 million climate refugees. And if we don't act now, this could rise to over 1 billion, a billion by 2050. So sadly, 1 in 5 women who are refugees or displaced has experienced sexual violence. So it's quite sobering. So this is why Zonta Says Now seeks climate justice for women and girls so they can prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from the impacts of climate change on the same basis as men. So I encourage you to learn more about Zonta's 3 international service projects for this biennium. We're entering the 3rd phase of our signature programme with the UNFPA to end child marriage in 12 countries. Our Climate Empower project with the UNFPA aims to prevent climate-induced gender-based violence in Madagascar, Mozambique and South Sudan. And the Lahar project extends UNICEF's virtual safe space from 6 to 12 countries, enabling women and girls to safely access information and services online about gender-based violence and sexual and reproductive health. So now we've set the scene and see where we are. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Anjali Sharma. Anjali is 20 years old. She started her climate journey at the age of 12, and at 14, she was organising school climate strikes. At 16, she became the lead litigant of Sharma versus the Environment Minister, a class action legal case which argued that the Environment Minister owes all young people a duty of care to protect them from the impacts of climate change. In 2021, she was successful, but following an appeal from the minister, the ruling was overturned. However, Anjali continued the campaign, calling to have this duty legislated through federal parliament. And many of you would have seen her on the ABC's Australian Story in March. Anjali aims to raise awareness about the disproportionate impacts of climate change, particularly towards young people and people of colour. And you will have the opportunity to ask questions to Anjali after her presentations. And you can also put any questions you think of in the chat line as you listen to her talk. So it gives me great pleasure to hand over to you, Anjali. I'll stop my share, and so as you can share your screen at your leisure.
Thank you so much, Carol. I don't have screen sharing permission yet. Could you give that to me?
Yes, that would help, wouldn't it?
Thank you so much. Thank you. That was a really, really comprehensive introduction. I loved the slideshow. I loved the infographics, and it sounds like, and I know of what I know of Zonta already is you guys are doing amazing work in the sphere of gender equality, in the sphere of climate change. So I'm really, really excited to come here and to chat to everyone today. Can you see my slides?
Can now, they're just coming up.
Beautiful. All right. So as you said, my name is Anjali Sharma. I'm 20 years old and I was born in India, but I moved to Australia when I was only 10 months old. So I'm currently calling in from the lands of the Ngunnawal people in Canberra. And all of my extended family, as pictured here, live on the other side of the world. So in between every single one of my visits where I get to go back home to India, one of my cousins will inevitably get married, or they'll have a baby, or they'll get a dog, or they'll move house. These are really incredible life milestones that I have to witness, unfortunately, through WhatsApp group chats and messenger group calls. But life milestones aren't the only thing that I've seen from afar. So I want to start by reading out some news headlines for everyone. Indian capital of Delhi breaks all-time heat record as authorities impose water rationing. This was from CNN, published on the 29th of May this year. I was born in the city of Delhi, and this year, for 3 days in a row, it reached 53 degrees Celsius. Intense heatwave this year claimed 264 lives in India. This was in 2023, in July, reporting by the Tribune India. These death tolls are likely underreported by hundreds, if not thousands. Deadly Indian heatwave made 30 times more likely by climate crisis. This is by The Guardian in 2022, so 2 years ago. You can see a pattern now. Bangladesh and India facing the worst flood in 122 years, also in 2022. So that was a year marked by heat waves and floods in quick succession. These are headlines of recent years, but they tell a story that spans back so many more. India is, and has been for so many years, a country on the front lines of the climate crisis. And for that reason, it intersects really clearly with the statistics that you brought up earlier, Carol, the ones about child marriage, the ones about resource shortages. All these really disproportionately affect women and girls in India, as they do in places like Sudan and Mozambique and all the other places that you mentioned. So, being an equatorial country, India's citizens have been exposed to severe heat that is only increasing in harshness and severity. Heat waves, like the ones I just mentioned in the last couple of years, have seen rubbish tips in India go up in flames. They've seen asphalt melt, like in this bottom right photo. They've seen birds fall out of the sky. And these, as I mentioned, have often been followed by destructive and devastating floods that have swept away cars, houses, trees, and power lines. India is an agrarian economy, with people relying on farming as a source of both food and income, including once again, my family. So pictured here is my family's farm. In recent years, the monsoon season has been coming later, becoming more variable in strength and duration, and stripping people of their lives and livelihoods. So, once again, exactly what you mentioned, Carol, that intersection between increased rainfall, crops failing, increased violence against women, and yeah, people's lives and livelihoods being stripped away for multiple reasons. Now, I'm really lucky to be able to say that the extent to which I have witnessed this personally is really just through news footage and pictures. But there really is something to be said about witnessing this injustice from the other side of the world that I'm sure every single one of you on this call here feels too. Knowing that climate change has not been felt at all to the same extent here, and knowing that when it is, we do have the resources here to safeguard our population and rebuild after disaster. In contrast, in India, only 1 in 5 people has air conditioning. And people seek recourse from heat by dipping blankets into cold water and hanging them on their window frames and on their doors. So they can't say the same. There is something to be said about hearing the latest climate disaster through the news, frantically contacting family, but being unable to reach them for days because floods have taken out the nearest cell tower, wondering who's dead and who's alive. So, as I said, I was 12 when I started to connect these events I was seeing with the concept of climate change. In school, then, we were talking about the environment, but the extent to what we were learning was really about individual responsibility. It was about taking shorter showers, it was about turning off the tap when we brushed our teeth, it was about turning off the lights when we left a room. And of course, individual responsibility is very important, and I strive to be as sustainable in my personal life as I can, as I'm sure many of you do too. But individual responsibility will never save the lives of the people that we have lost to climate disaster. So, using YouTube and Google and things like National Geographic and Al Jazeera and the BBC, and really anything else I could find to learn about climate change, first led me into School Strike for Climate. So, I was part of the team in Melbourne that organised the 2019 September school strikes that saw 200,000 people take to the streets of Melbourne, calling on the former Morrison government to be better and to be a more ambitious government entity on climate change. So this was at the age of 14 when I actually started to find ways to stand up for my future. Then, at the age of 16, I became the lead litigant of the Sharma and Minister for the Environment class action. This meant that I was lucky enough to lead 8 young people as we took the former federal environment minister, Susan Lee, to court. We argued that she owed us, as young people, a duty of care to protect us from the impacts of climate change. We argued that the Environment Minister, when exercising her powers and her unique ability to approve or deny the expansions of fossil fuel projects or the public funding and fossil fuel infrastructure, that she should do so, making sure that the interests of young people are a paramount consideration and front of mind. And initially, we were successful. The federal court established this duty of care. Additionally, the federal court unequivocally accepted all of the science that we put to them regarding climate change. They accepted that climate change is anthropogenic, and they accepted that climate change will disproportionately impact future generations. This precedent has been used since then to build on for further climate cases that are before the federal court right now. Unfortunately, the government then appealed this ruling, and they found it within their hearts to take 8 young people back to the federal court to argue that they did not, in fact, have this duty of care. Although the acceptance of the climate science that I just mentioned did remain intact, luckily, before the full bench of the federal court, this duty of care was overturned. However, the court said something really, really interesting when they overturned this duty. In doing so, they said so explicitly that their ruling wasn't because they believed this duty of care didn't exist. They said that if it did exist, it was the job of the government to create it and implement it, rather than their job to impose it on the government, as we were asking. So it was from this phrase on your screens right now that our political campaign was born. I founded the Duty of Care campaign, which is a team of me and 3 of my best friends, pictured in the photo on the right. We're calling on the government to put in place legislation that establishes that they owe current and future generations a duty of care to protect our health and well-being in the face of climate change. Our belief is that if we know that the young people of today and tomorrow will be worst affected by climate change, then this must be reflected in legislation. So our advocacy has seen a bill be tabled in Parliament to this effect by Senator David Pocock, which has got the support of people and organisations from all walks of life. So this is my story. This is why my life has played out to this moment in the way that it has. But unfortunately, in my advocacy journey, I found that there are so many young people who have stories like this. Stories about being terrorized by fire and smoke during that horrific 2019-2020 bushfire season. Stories about losing homes to floods and cyclones. Stories about seeing family go through the same. If you ask me, I believe that everyone has a story. All of you sitting in this virtual meeting room right now have a story. You have something you care about and something that you want to see change, which is why you're here today. And every young person out there in the world has a story too. And yet, when we ask how many young people in particular would consider themselves to be involved in something like this, something shaping their future and what it looks like, there's a lot less young people that would say yes to that than would agree that they have a story and something that they want to see change. So I ask then, what's the problem? What's stopping them? The problem isn't that young people don't care. The problem is that we feel that we're not qualified or that we don't know enough to care, to raise our voices. Young people are constantly told that we're too young to know something, too young to understand the world around us, too young to change things. When I was first part of organising the school strikes is when I first began to understand this disturbing narrative that young people don't know anything or don't care about anything apart from their phones and TikTok. We were young people trying to articulate our fears about what climate change meant for the futures of us and our friends to the leaders of our country. And here we were being told to go back to school. We knew our stuff, but we were constantly talked down to, constantly made to feel like we were anything but legitimate voices with legitimate concerns. And I wish that 5 years on, I could be sitting here telling you that so much has changed. But unfortunately, just last year, in one of my meetings with my friends lobbying for the Duty of Care bill, we walked into the office of a government MP. We started our spiel about who we were and what the Duty of Care campaign was, and almost immediately we were cut off. We were asked, "Do you even know anything about the government's climate policies?" And of course we did. That's why we were there. But that was the start of a meeting where we could not get a word in. School Strike for Climate came to the table with 3 demands in 2019 when we organised those massive strikes. We asked for net zero by 2030. We asked for no public funding for fossil fuel projects. And we asked for a just transition for fossil fuel workers. And that year, there were 300,000 people around the country who walked with us on the streets. And yet, our country's leaders did not constructively engage with a single one of our demands. So when young people feel like we aren't listened to, we're pushed down one of 2 roads. The first one is what I call radicalization, for lack of a better word, when we find more and different ways to make our voices heard. That's when every setback only makes us more determined, and when we constantly channel our frustration into activism. The second road, however, is disillusionment. That's when setback leads to burnout, and the frustration is just too much to bear. Young people who feel like they've spent so much time and so much energy and mental capacity on trying to make a difference alongside school, alongside work, alongside life, and that the odds are just stacked against them. Effort without results erodes trust in our political system, creating the belief that our contributions are futile, that we actually cannot make a difference, no matter how much we try. I'm just going to stop here because I've seen Helen's question in the chat. Do you feel like the current government is more willing to discuss this issue with you? And absolutely, I would say right now that the Duty of Care campaign would not have gotten as far as it has now under the previous government. So the access that we have now, the fact that we have a good number of government backbenchers and assistant ministers listening to us and acknowledging the fact that we need legislation for future generations is so, so heartening and something we would not have seen from the former government. That being said, unfortunately, this attitude that young people don't deserve to have a say in legislative discussions or in policy making seems to be really, really pervasive because it's something I've seen from both the former government and the current government. So while it is changing for the better, it's nowhere near where it needs to be, in my opinion. I'll continue now. Forcing young people down the road of disillusionment is the biggest flaw of our political system. Creating in young people the belief that no matter what we do, our voices will not be heard is the biggest flaw of a so-called democracy. So like I said, this isn't something I've seen change as much as it should over the 5 or so years I've been involved in advocacy. But it needs to. Young people need to be driving change just as much as generations above us are, because we are currently doing it a lot less, and yet it is young people who stand to be worst affected by the impacts of climate change. I've just seen Petra's comment in the chat, am I considering a career in politics? Currently I'm doing my best to finish uni. So once we get past that, I think I'll have more of a long-term view, but unfortunately that's taking up a lot of my time right now. It's definitely not ruled out for me, but it'll be a little bit in the future, that's for sure. 2025 is not my year. I'm also going to talk a little bit about what happens when young people do get involved. The Duty of Care campaign is for young people. As I mentioned, our advocacy has seen a bill tabled in Parliament by Senator David Pocock that seeks to establish that the government owes us a duty of care to protect our health and well-being in the face of climate change. So this was in November last year, these pictures you're seeing, where we brought 26 young people from around the country to meet with their local MPs and senators in Canberra for a few days. Our lobbying effort saw these 26 young people meet with more than 50 politicians. You'll see in the front of this picture, these 4 children in school uniforms. These are Amber, Alba, Jimmy, and Ben. They were in Year 6 at Radford College in Canberra last year, and they came along to help us talk to some MPs about the bill. At 12 years old, they were more passionate and more knowledgeable than I could have ever expected. And I learned so much from them on my first day. You can see in this picture that Amber and Albert are holding highlighted notes that Jimmy and Ben also have just in their bags. So they walked into these meetings with whole folders of notes and notebooks. And in my first meeting with Ben, he said words I never thought I would hear a 12-year-old say. He looked at a government politician in the eyes and he said, "Don't you think the duty of care bill is complementary to Labour's policy platform?" By the end of the day, we had written support for the duty of care bill from 30 politicians, with 11 of them being from the government. So there's an instance where the government has been a lot more supportive for this mechanism than the former government would ever have been. But the duty of care bill was referred to the Senate Committee for Environment and Communications. The inquiry included a public submissions process, which meant that anybody from the public could write to the Parliament and have their views on the bill known. We spent months and months emailing and on the phones, and we ran youth submissions writing workshops, empowering young people to engage with the submissions process. We called on large organisations to stand by our side and back us in. We even got primary school kids to draw pictures and send them in to the Senate committee. And we received 403 submissions. For context, most public inquiries, for those of you who don't know, they usually receive 20, 30 if they're lucky. But by the end of the process, our bill was backed in by people from all walks of life, by organisations from the Climate Council to Ben and Jerry's to the National Tertiary Education Union. And only one of these 403 submissions was openly against the bill, and that was the IPA, of which Gina Reinhart is an honorary member. So look at the issues, look at the power that young people have when they do make a difference. The issues we face are daunting, and we are staring down the barrel at a world that could be characterized by climate change increasing in frequency and severity. And the generations to come will bear the brunt. But we can do a hell of a lot more about it than we might think. The Senate inquiry that I've just been talking about concluded in June with the committee reporting back on the duty of care bill. Despite this incredible level of support, the committee still recommended that the bill not pass. So nothing will drive home my fact that despite the fact that the government process has gotten better, they're still not listening to young people. More than the fact that despite 400 organisations, businesses and unions calling for the duty of care bill, the government sided with the former government and the singular IPA submission that was against the duty of care bill. But despite this, we have made a lot of change. People are watching and they are outraged that the government doesn't believe that they must care about current and future generations. And the bill is still alive because it will go to a vote sometime, perhaps this parliamentary term, perhaps in the next. And my team and I will be campaigning for it until the very last second. I hope that the Duty of Care campaign is a testament to the vision that young people can have and what can be achieved when we come together and refuse to be condescended to. So if there's one message that I want you to take away from what I've said to you today, it's this. Young people are not passive inheritors of the world that will soon be ours. We must be participants in it, shapers of it. We must be the architects of the future that we envision. Our actions, our voices, and our determination must create the world we want to live in. So my ask to each one of you is to support the young people in your lives, to build them up and to empower them every day to create a sense of what is right and wrong, to create a sense of what is just and what must change. It is this that has made such a difference in my life and my advocacy journey, getting me to the point where I am now. And I hope this can be the case for countless young people after me. And that's all I have. And I see some questions in the chat, so I'll get straight to them. Helen asked, what have you learned from this? Would you have done anything differently? I think one of the biggest takeaways I've gotten is that Successful advocacy, unfortunately, really has to be done as if you're walking on eggshells. The government really doesn't like to be attacked. So we've our action plan has been to go into these meetings and say, you're doing a great job, but here's one thing you could do to maybe make it easier for you to achieve the targets that you've already legislated, or here's one thing you could do to maybe put in place the policies that you have already legislated a little bit better, rather than going in and saying, you're not working for the futures of young people, you're not doing what's in our best interest, because that's when they get immediately straight away very defensive. That's the biggest thing I've learned. Would I have done anything differently? I think that um, apart from minor things that haven't gone perfectly in our campaign, like little events being cancelled here and there, I'm quite proud of what we've achieved, and I think that we really did everything we could to make it as politically and publicly costly for the government to not agree that they have a duty of care, given that we have people from all walks of life backing us in. And that's, yeah, something I'm really proud of and something I think we can continue to build on. Um, the reason given by the Senate committee to not support the bill, there was multiple. They talked about how the definition of health was quite broad in the bill and how it needed to be kind of constrained. They talked about implementation problems and whether this would sit really with Tanya Plibersek as the Minister for the Environment or Chris Bowen as the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. There were a few other minor reasons here and there, citing implementation, citing definitional problems, but I think our main concern with that was that none of these issues that were cited by the Senate committee in their report were things that could not be changed. And we'd gone into every single meeting and every single negotiation that we'd had with the government, making it completely clear that we knew the bill wasn't perfect and we knew that we needed to be up to having a discussion, and we were. And yet, despite that, and instead of having a discussion, the government continuously rejected the bill, completely refusing to discuss it, to discuss amendments, to discuss constraining that definition or working out some of those implementational challenges. They put it straight away in the too hard basket, instead of actually looking to see how we could get over these challenges that were they, they were they were definitely challenges that we needed to address, but it seemed like they weren't willing to address them. Um,
Anjali, I just
yeah,
noticed that Sue's got her hand up with a question. So I'll just
yeah.
defer to Sue. You're on mute, Sue.
Okay. So good morning from France. So I'm saying good morning, you're good afternoon. Anjali, and to everybody there, Carol is actually going to speak to Kate Thwaites on November the 14th in a Zoom with Zonta Australia. I just noticed Petra's question or statement in there too. I also noticed that Kate Thwaites was in one of the pictures of the politicians that you met, Anjali. So I think this would be, the perfect time for Zonta Says Now, if everybody agrees, to kind of make a statement to Kate that we do support your endeavours wholeheartedly and those of young people in Australia, and that you also, Carol, made a submission to that about that. So, yeah, and Anjali, I think I have to say that having come just from Finland and now in France, unfortunately, you're in a very bad part of the world in terms of trying to do something about climate change. The countries, particularly Finland, are way ahead of us, and I think have a lot more respect for the environment and for young people.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Thanks, Suzanne. Is it Suzanne or Susan?
Yes.
Suzanne.
Oh, Suzanne,
Firstly, incredibly jealous. I wish I was waking up in France right now. But yeah, thank you for your question. Kate Thwaites is, yeah, she's very supportive of the duty of care bill. We have a good coalition of government backbenchers, including Kate Thwaites, Peter Carlile, Josh Burns. So kind of those inner city Labour backbenchers who are really keen on the duty of care bill and have been using their voice within the caucus to advocate for it. But any support that Zonta can provide is so, so valued. So if you would be willing to make that statement to Kate Thwaites and ask her to push again for something like the duty of care bill, for the government to legislate something like that, if they aren't across David Pocock's bill as it stands, then that would be so, so appreciated. And absolutely agree that there are countries well ahead of Australia. If you look at Wales, Wales has instated a Future Generations Commissioner and a Future Generations Act that has been in place for a long time now. That means that every act that is passed by the Parliament of Wales has to be scrutinised against the impacts it will have on future generations. That's so much broader than what we're asking. We're asking for a small consideration of future generations in the area of climate change. But here, Wales is being able to do that consideration for every single bill and it not posing as big of an issue as the Senate highlighted in their report. So it shows that it can be done if you have ambition and if you have that willingness and that sense of justice for future generations. It's just that unfortunately we're still trying to push our government to that end. But yeah, any support that Zonta can offer would be so well appreciated.
We'd be happy to. I'll pass you over to Vicky now. Vicky has her hand up.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Anjali. It's been wonderful to hear you today. Really fantastic to hear how you've been so active with a lot of your teammates. And I want to support Suzanne in a response from us, if we can, be sent forward to show our support of you and your campaign. But also, I think you half answered my question in that what are other countries doing that we could take a few pointers from? I know it's not necessarily translatable from one country to another, but is there anything else that you've seen recently in other countries that you can consider taking forward?
Yeah, absolutely, Vicky. So, as I mentioned, there is that Future Generations Commissioner and Act in Wales. But beyond that, there's 161 countries around the world that have legislated a right to a healthy environment. And Australia doesn't even have a federal Human Rights Act here. So, there's no way we could do that as of now. We have very, very little in the way of legislative rights protections, and that means that we have very, very little in the way of protecting everyone's right to a healthy environment. Now, there's a difference between a duty of care and a right to a healthy environment because likely a duty of care would be something a bit more substantive, something a government would have to actively consider, and that would mean that they wouldn't be allowed to approve fossil fuel projects in some circumstances, whereas a right would usually lead to something like a compatibility statement or something that wouldn't necessarily give governments the power to not approve fossil fuel projects, but still that's something that 161 countries around the world have done, and Australia is not one of them.
Right.
So that's also something in the same kind of area that we're pushing for as a duty of care team, and there's a lot of fertile ground there to work with because really being the 162nd country to legislate that right is quite embarrassing for Australia.
Yes. Thank you very much, Anjali. And that's very interesting. I didn't realise it'd be as many as 161.
Yeah, absolutely. Australia's a big laggard in that, right?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you, Vicky.
In the chat, we'd put, how do you stay motivated and avoid burnout in your continued fight for climate justice?
Yeah, thank you, Carol. I see that was your question. It's quite hard, I've got to say, when like I said, you feel like you've put so much effort into something, and you've done it alongside work and alongside uni and alongside trying to manage the commitments that come with your own life. And yet the government finds it so easy to just find a definitional challenge or an implementational challenge to say no to a campaign that has been going for 4 years. Setbacks like that are really, really hard to mentally deal with. But I think there's a few things that keep me going. And firstly, it's the group of girls that I do this work with because they are so motivated and so hardworking and come from so many different backgrounds. So there's Hannah, who has done extensive volunteering for AYCC and done a lot of work on the Northern Territory gas expansion stuff. There's Daisy, who had a good background in School Strike for Climate and has written a book. And then there's Jess, who really just came to the table on all this climate stuff this year. She was one of my friends I met at uni and got involved because I thought she might like it. So we have really, really diverse experiences there, and they come with really fresh perspectives, and we're really good at picking each other up, I think. And I know that when I need to take a step back, there's people there to cover me. And same with all of them. So it's seeing their passion that keeps me passionate and then extending that beyond them. I think if I go back to that slide where there was those pictures drawn by the school children that they then sent into the Senate committee, that was, firstly, I didn't know that was happening. I got a random email from a random parent who said, "Look at what my children and her friends did." And it was a attachment of 20 pictures that all these kids had drawn saying, "Sharma is right," saying, "Duty of care for us." And it was just so, so heartening. And to know that there are people in all corners of Australia who are talking about the duty of care bill, who are knowing that it could have an impact on their futures, who are knowing that it's the right thing to do, will make me continuously keep pushing for it for all of these people, despite any setback that could occur, because I know that in my heart of hearts it is the right thing to do, and it will help so many people, and it will have that ripple effect that will mean that it will reach those children in the west of Melbourne or wherever they were when they drew those pictures, that it could one day have an impact on their lives. I think holding that really close to me is another thing that keeps me going.
Good. I noticed in the chat, Bernadine had asked, would people power, similar to Me Too and similar, be an option to raise our voices?
Is people power, sorry, what do you mean by people power?
We'll ask Bernadine. Bernadine?
Sorry, yes, I'm having a little bit of internet connection problem, so I won't put my picture up. I keep losing it. And I was thinking, like with the Me Too movement and things like that, it really raised the issue of sexual violence and domestic and family violence. And I think it got a lot more politicians on board. And I was wondering whether, I know you did the school strikes in the past, but thinking of what Greta Thunberg has done around the world as well, would raising that awareness to a higher level with the community and showing the politicians, you know, the numbers basically, would that be an option in the future?
Absolutely, absolutely, I think. There's a statistic that says you only need something like 3.2% of a given population to show up to a protest to achieve legislative change. That I read somewhere at some point. That really sticks with me because I think we do have those numbers, and I think that even though those numbers are kind of still sitting in their homes, on their couches, and not protesting on the streets right now, like they did back in 2019, that there are people around the country who are caring. And I think that something like the Me Too movement, we saw how impactful it was, and we saw that it captured hearts and minds all over the country, and that they were being projected into people's lounge rooms through the TV screens. Something like that is so impactful. And it absolutely would be an option for change because, like you said, it's a physical demonstration of the numbers that people have for a particular movement. And at the end of the day, it's us, it's those people who turn up to those protests, who employ our politicians, and who make sure that at every 3-year election cycle term that the politicians still have jobs, and still are able to represent their community. And turning out in big numbers really sends a chill through their spines, because that's when they know that to make sure they keep their jobs at that next 3-year turn, they've got to change something about the way they're doing something. So yeah, absolutely. And I hope that Me Too really came off a moment. And so did School Strike. I think there are these moments in public awareness where something has just happened, or some government has done something that's abhorrent, and not well received by society, that leads to these big moments. So we're looking for the next one, and we're really going to hope to capitalize off it.
Anjali, do you see that in Azerbaijan at the next COP, they're going to announce whether or not Australia's been successful in its bid to host COP31. Do you think there's an opportunity there for maximising profile of the issues? And I can just see you getting 200,000 people out quite easily.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think another really, really key pressure point there is the fact that if Australia does host COP31, they'll be hosting it with nations throughout the Pacific. And we all know that Pacific Islands and Pacific Islander politicians are some of the strongest voices calling for greater climate action. They're some of the strongest voices holding the Australian government to account and telling the Australian government to do better. Because ultimately it's Pacific Islander states that stand to lose a lot from climate change. We know that by the end of this century, islands like Tuvalu, islands like the Marshall Islands could be underwater, and that means a displaced population, that means a loss of culture and history and heritage, and that has significant flow-on effects, not just for the Pacific then, but for Australia, because then there's a question of where do those populations go and how does Australia fulfill its international humanitarian responsibilities? And that's a responsibility that every nation needs to be carrying, including Australia. And the fact that Australia isn't just hosting COP31 on its own, but is doing so with the Pacific means that it can't do so with continuing to approve 3 coal mines like we saw last week, because the Pacific Islander politicians aren't across that. We've seen the Tuvalu climate minister come out in the last week and say that's not on. And so it's a great opportunity, I think, for Australia to be held to account.
Good. What are your next big steps for your activism, especially advancing climate justice and legal accountability in Australia?
So we're continuing, as I said, to push along with the Duty of Care campaign. We're going to be transitioning into a different phase of our campaign now, where we ask the government to legislate the Duty of Care bill and incorporate it into their own policy platform. It comes from the knowledge that we know that private members' bills are very, very rarely successful, and that the government is very rarely willing to accept legislation that hasn't gone through its processes and consultations. And we know that the government has so much rhetoric on climate change and young people and how much they believe in both. And so we're asking now for the government to really act on that, but on their own. So do it however they want, go through their own process and consultations, but at the end, we want a legislative mechanism that accounts for the rights and interests of young people. So we're transitioning into that phase, and we'll be launching it with a few initiatives that we're currently working on. As we do that, as I said, there's this really interesting campaign for a Human Rights Act in Australia that is currently shaping up. And the Joint Committee into the Human Rights Act recommended that when a Human Rights Act is legislated, that it should incorporate a right to a healthy environment. So there's really, as I said, fertile ground there as well, to push for more substantive climate protections. And in that case, not just for young people, but for every generation, including generations to come. So we're working with NGOs on that campaign too, and we're really looking forward to seeing how that goes, particularly in the next term of government. And yeah, speaking of that, we're working towards the federal election because, as per usual, climate will be, if not obviously the highest priority, because that seems to be cost of living, but it still will be one of the main priorities that people take to the voting box. So we'll be looking for every opportunity that we can to start a discussion about climate change, about future generations, and make sure that as an issue, it is as costly at the ballot box as it can be, to serve as a wake-up call for the government to ensure that they haven't gotten too comfy in their seats over the last 3 years.
At one of our previous meetings, we were talking about the older ladies in Switzerland who'd taken their government to court, through the European human rights courts, and they'd won by basically saying that the Swiss government hadn't been taking sufficient action on climate change. I was just thinking that we have the young people, we have the older people, and it's I think perhaps through this Human Rights Act, we might be able to work together to help get more momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about working together. Those 100 or so Swiss women brought together an amazing, amazing case, but they were supported in doing so by Greenpeace and by many other NGOs who funded them and who brought them together as a group and who, amazing pro bono lawyers who helped draft their submissions and who helped make sure that their affidavits were as strong as possible. A single person, no matter how much ambition and passion they have for a certain problem, will never be able to achieve as much change as a collective with various and a variety of skills and talents can. So those 100 Swiss women, behind them were NGOs, behind them were lawyers and public relations specialists and media specialists who made sure that their case had a wide-ranging impact and had the best chance of being successful. So no singular campaign on the climate change front will be successful in solving climate change. And that's why we need things like the Duty of Care campaign. We need things like the Knitting Nanas. We need things like XR and people working in really all forms of civil disobedience and all forms, like within Parliament, outside of Parliament, that are making sure that every sector of the country is really being pushed on this issue and that awareness is being raised in every possible forum.
Yes, I'm just checking through here. People are mentioning the book, Rebecca Solnit's latest book, Too Late, Changing the Climate Story from Despair to Possibility. Just making note of that one. Mentioning the Tiwi Islands being vulnerable. Thanking you for your resilience and persistence and how we want to support you and your peers in the push for a duty of care. When you have an opportunity to present at COP, I mean, we'll obviously try and help you with that one.
Yeah, some of my team have put in applications to go to COP this year in Azerbaijan, so we're waiting to hear back from that. That will be really good for us to be represented there and to kind of have that level of access. In terms of COP31, we're definitely working towards that with lots of other NGOs, and we'd love to make that as impactful as possible. And make sure that the government can't host COP31 while approving coal projects and gas projects at the same time.
Brilliant. Now, did anyone else have any more questions? Do you want to put your hands up? I'm just looking through the photos in case anyone's got their hands up and hasn't pressed the thing. No, that's good. My first response to you coming today is just a huge thank you, because we've wanted to talk to you for ages. And I think it's really important that we keep in touch, because you're a very small group, just 4 of you by the sounds of it. And I know how isolating it can be when you're trying to do these things and you think that you've got all this big world out there, and you can feel very vulnerable. And so if at any time that you want to talk or just have a chat, join these groups. Please encourage your team to join our think tank. We'd be more than happy to have you as come along regularly. We have our website where we host our events, because I'm sure we can learn so much from you, and we'd really appreciate your views and input. And I just want to congratulate you for everything you have achieved. I mean, getting climate science accepted through the courts was an absolutely huge achievement. And I know you worked with Will Stephan with that as well, didn't you? The late Will Stephan. So
yeah,
I mean, you immortalized his work through your actions, which was absolutely great. And I just want to, on behalf of everyone here today, I just want to give you an enormous thanks for sharing your story today in such an eloquent way.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Carol. That means so we and yeah, we'll definitely keep in touch. Would love to come to these think tanks more often. We love your work at Zonta so much. And yeah, thank you so much for your kind words.
Thank you so much. You're very welcome to stay we've just got a few other things that we're just going to be sharing and talking about, so you get a feel for what we're about. And but I've learned so much through your journey, and I mean, you've woken up our eyes with regards to the human rights story. So I think that's really brilliant. That's really brilliant.
Thank you. I actually got to head off because I've got an assignment due tonight. But I'm putting the finishing touches on. But thank you so much for having me.
Yes, well, we'll have the video of it on the website as well. So do encourage your friends to share too. Okay, thank you again. Really
Thanks,
appreciate
Carol.
you taking the time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, wasn't she marvellous?
Amazing.
Absolutely marvellous. Has my screen shared properly?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Well,
I
I'm just saying thank you for organising, Anjali. That was fantastic, Carol.
Oh, she's amazing.
Mm.
I just wanted to raise awareness of the last UNICEF report that came out that says the lives of children are being shortened and altered by the climate crisis, with their 3 recommendations: reduce the emissions, protect children from the impact of climate change, and prioritise children's health and well-being in climate policy investment and action. Interesting report. So I thought it's timely just to highlight that with Anjali being amongst us. So we have quite a lot going on in the international space. So I just wanted to summarise these things. Those of you that have signed up for the Intercontinental Think Tank update would have seen this little article that mentioned in September we had the Summit of the Future that resulted in the Pact for the Future. We had Climate Week. In October this month, there's the Biodiversity COP16 in Cali, Colombia. In November, we've got COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. We've got the UN Environment Programme is doing its final negotiations towards the Global Plastic Treaty, which is an immense achievement if it comes off. And in December, we've got the desertification COP16 in Saudi Arabia. So there's a lot going on. And if you weren't sure what the Summit for the Future, the Pact for the Future, this is the one that was aiming to turbocharge the Sustainable Development Goals. And it had these different areas that was it covered, but every chapter included human rights, gender, and sustainable development. So we had the Pact and also 2 declarations, the Declaration on Future Generations and also the Global Digital Compact. Well, it got all signed, which is great. And I'd really draw your attention to Article 11 in it, Article 8, which is all about focuses on gender equality. But we'll cover more of that in the next meeting, I think. As most of you who come up regularly will know, the think tanks are where we meet and share our information and get inspired to take action. We have our intercontinental think tanks in odd months and our Australian think tank in even months. And then we also have, these are our events during the year: International Women's Day in March, CSW, Commission on the Status of Women, in March as well, Earth Day in April, and then we on the events calendar, a Girl Child, Day of the Girl Child, which was yesterday, and the 16 Days of Activism. And the idea is that we feed our enthusiasm and what we've learned in back to our advocacy teams, whether it be in our club, our areas, our districts, wherever they may be, so that we can actually just have a conversation and bring the information back through our advocacy teams. With regards to economic opportunity in the Girl Child, we've done some materials just recently. The Day of the Girl Child, we had these posts that you could use on social media. But I want to give you a quick heads up of what we've got for our information on economic opportunity, the fact sheet. I'm giving you a sneak preview. We're hoping that this will be uploaded to the Zonta International website in the next couple of weeks. But basically, it's designed to be read online. The links, the hyperlinks are all there, but it takes you through the economic opportunities for women in the context of climate change. So it takes you on a journey. So it's got loads of hyperlinks all the way through it. It just looks beautiful. It's been done by Zontians in Germany, Sweden, USA, with the main ones that put it together. So this is all of the stuff has been done by Zontians. It's not been done elsewhere. Okay, it's all volunteers. It talks about human rights, where you can get reputable resources. It explores how our consumption, the overconsumption days. It looks at how climate change impacts women's poverty. 1 in 10 women in the world lives in extreme poverty. It's just horrendous. But all of these, the hyperlinks are all there, giving you the story. It shows the economic cost of gender-based violence. It shows you the economic and mental health challenges associated with climate change. And it goes through solutions. such as how to achieve financial equality. Because remember, this is the economic opportunity one. It also explores the measures we can take, how we measure success in our societies. So it introduces well-being economies and donut economics, and the must-read book Earth for All, which was co-written by Johan Rockström. And this is Johan Rockström talking to Pia Hultgren, who's a Zontian from Sweden. Pia is a meteorologist in Sweden, and so she's quite a good friend of Johan's. If you've been in the climate space, I think everyone's heard of Johan. And it talks about what next in the Summit for the Future and COP29. It also goes through Beijing 30. So next year is the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform Agenda for Action. And the Commission on the Status of Women is holding a meeting in New York in March, and it's investigating how we can accelerate action to meet the Beijing Declaration, because we've been doing it for 30 years and some of the gaps are widening, you know. We hope to hold, as Zonta Says Now, face-to-face workshop at their parallel event at NGO CSW. And so the fact sheet also shows straightforward actions that you can take by following the Zonta Says Now framework for action. You know, gather the facts, lead by example, use our voice, advocate and collaborate. So there's quite a lot in it. So we hope that when it comes out, you'll use the fact sheet to help you on your own journeys. We also have the virtual art gallery is open for submissions for this year. And I want to give a thanks to everyone from around Australia who made submissions for the art gallery. It was really good because it was the first year, and the first year is always the hardest. So I'd encourage you all to submit something. When it comes to Australian news, I want you to be aware of UN Women's Safe Everywhere Always campaign. Many clubs will be doing their own 16 days of activism for Zonta Says No campaigns, but some individuals and supporting members may not be able to join up with something else, so they may consider being part of UN Women's fundraising campaign, which is basically raising funds, walking 30, 60, 90 Ks. But there's lots of resources there that may be useful for clubs, like this fact sheet, a look at the financial cost of violence against women. That might be a useful one for us to refer to in our own campaigns. They've got some media posts as well of what they do, and also Zoom backgrounds. Sue, did you want to give a profile on the women taking climate action? But you probably won't be able to because you're in France. I don't know if you've had any entries.
Thanks, Carol. So at the moment it's closing October the 21st. So if you do know women who are eligible to apply for the Women Taking Climate Action Award, it would be great if you could contact them and ask them to apply. The actual application form is you can get it through Zonta Says Now site, or you can get it through the Zonta Melbourne on Yarra website. And if there were somebody who wants to apply who now feels they can't get in by that date or something, if you just let me know, and we can kind of discuss that, because we'd rather have an application late that's good than not to give them the opportunity to apply.
Fair enough. That's good. Thank you for that, Sue. And I just wanted to, Bernadine, is there anything that you wanted to say from the Zonta Australia committee while we're here?
No, I wasn't prepared to do anything. Petra, is there anything we need to bring up? Petra's on it with me, as well as Leslie. But I do like the idea of perhaps looking at doing something towards the climate change with our organisation through Zonta Australia. So I think that's something we could work.
Yeah, I think the committee is still focusing on what are going to be its key targets. And I think the fact that you've been invited to the meeting with Carol tells you you'll probably be on the list. The next facet then will be when the website is set up to obviously link to the districts, link to you, all of that kind of stuff. So it's all like a work in progress, but I'm sure we'll be linking to you.
Excellent. I'm sure that members are just really pleased to hear that there's so much happening behind the scenes with Zonta Australia. Annabelle, you have your hand raised.
Was there any resulting action or joining together from the previous meeting of Zonta and the Women's Climate Congress? Because that's now across Australia.
Oh yes, the Women's Climate Congress, we advertise each other's events. That's about as far as we've got so far, because we encourage members to go and listen to their book clubs and you know, hear about what's going on there. We've done nothing formally at this stage, but when the Zonta Australia is up and running properly, it is something that we can do properly then.
Okay.
I just want to what was I doing here? Yeah, on other news, yeah. I just wanted to just quickly share with you this poster competition that they had at the University of Western Australia. Kate Cheney, an independent member of Parliament, was giving the address at the Contemporary Issues and Principles of Responsible Management Education event at UWA, and her theme was climate change and gender equity. And parallel to that talk, they had a poster competition for students at UWA, and they said to them, you had to create the poster using Canva, which is an online graphic design tool, and this is what they came up with. So there was just 8 entries, and they put them all on display in the room next to where the talk was done, and this is what they look like. I think this one was done in artificial intelligence because the face looks a little bit funny, but it's, anyway, as part of this, there were a few of us, well, I was one of the judges asked to judge the program. And so it was really interesting to see the different types of poster that people came up with. And some had lots of information, like a scientific poster, and others were more catch your eye posters. So I thought this was quite an interesting project, because this is actually the one that won, and this man here wrote it, and he's from Oman, so it was really nice to have the different genders there. He had these scanned for more information, but they were just an interesting opportunity. This one here, Kate Cheney took with her to put in her office, in her office in Canberra. So I thought that was really nice. And so there's, you may want to encourage your people in your clubs who may not have regard themselves as being very artistic. They might want to do a poster for the virtual art gallery. So anything it gives you some ideas anyway to work from. And I just want to share a couple of news items. Scientists find overshooting 1.5 of warming will cause catastrophic changes that cannot be reversed for decades. And we're hearing all this horrible news that's coming through. But what does it mean on a personal level? And I just want to share this little video, a conversation about insurance. Let's see if it comes up.
Hello, Sunshine Insurance. This is Kelly. Hi, Kelly. I just got this bill in the mail. I think there's been a mistake. My insurance is usually around $1,500, but this says it's gone up by 30%.
That doesn't sound right. Let me just check that for you. Oh, no, that is correct. I think you're one of the 50% of Australians who live in a bushfire risk area.
I live in the suburbs.
According to our mapping, your suburb is at risk.
But I've lived here for 20 years. What's changed?
Bushfires have gotten worse.
Climate change.
Yep.
I can't afford this.
You're actually lucky you can even get insurance.
What?
1 in 25 properties won't even be able to get insurance by 2030 at any cost.
So you're telling me that my insurance is unaffordable, and in a few years I won't even be able to get insurance?
Yeah.
I want to make a complaint.
I understand. I can put you through to the fossil fuel companies.
Why then?
The emissions from the mining and burning of fossil fuels are making climate change worse, so we get more extreme bushfires, and you have to pay more and more for your insurance.
So they're causing the problem, I'm getting the bill, and they're making profit.
$12.7 billion, in fact.
What?
Last year, Santos and Woodside alone made $12.7 billion in profits. Enough to pay for the annual insurance of every single house at risk of bushfire.
12.7 billion? I couldn't earn that if I'd been working since the Ice Age.
Before the first Homo sapiens, in fact. And not only are they not paying for the damage they're causing to our homes, the planet, our futures, they barely pay any tax, while taxpayers like you and me give them more money via subsidies.
And my insurance goes up by 30%.
So how would you like to pay?
That's beautifully done.
Very good. Very good.
Very
I just love
Too
that.
gorgeous.
If any of you come across any short, succinct videos that you think the group would like to share, please share them with me. It's always good to see the message done in a different way. And the other bit of good news was Australia receives enough energy from the sun each year to power the world more than 100 times.
Wow.
And UK closed its last coal-fired power plant, pushing ahead with rapid shift to clean energy. So it can be done. So anyway, I thought you'd enjoy that. Our next meeting is on Saturday, the 14th of December. And our speaker will be Dr. Catherine Trundle. And she works in the area of heat stress as well as climate justice. So I think that will be very timely given the beginning of the summer as it comes through. Notice the time zones, so just keep aware of where you are. Was there any questions that anybody had before we wrap up for today?
I always think, I know this is not just want to make a comment. The other thing that seems not, well, confound, but also we need to be thinking about at the same time is war.
Yes, we have a huge
these
problem.
Two dreadful broad wars are doing to the environment and to women, and talking about whether there's any possibility of thinking about both things at once.
Exactly.
I don't know.
This biennium, we had two tasks we had to focus on, which by the international president, and that was the economic opportunity and also women in decision making. But we find that through the Pact for the Future, there is a lot of commentary about war, the intersection between war, gender equality, human rights, and climate change in particular. So you're spot on. It's a very scary time at the moment. I'll let you all assimilate all that information, and I wish you all the well for the next 2 months until we meet again in December. So until then, keep breathing, keep smiling, and have fun. And we'll
Thanks,
catch
Carol.
you.
Thanks, Carol.
Thanks, Carol.
Carol. Thank you.